Hello and welcome to the MBA Success Podcast. Unfortunately, in this episode, I experienced some microphone issues, so I apologize for that. However, Matt still sounds great and shares with us some amazing stories, so please stick around. Well, welcome back to another episode of the MBA Success Podcast. Today, I have with me the CEO and founder of Ducere Global Business School, Matt Jacobson. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Pleasure, Ross. Thanks for inviting me to be on the show.
Yeah. Now, this morning I watched a video of you 11 years ago on your YouTube channel about your vision for Ducere Global Business School. And in it, you mentioned that you started your first business in grade 1. I'm very curious to know what this business was, and secondly, the impact it had on you as a person and how you developed into an entrepreneur.
Wow. Okay. So I probably can't say it was the most successful business ever, but it was really interesting, some interesting lessons that I learned. But yeah, I've always been entrepreneurial. I've always been starting businesses throughout school. The earliest that I can remember is in grade 1. And what I really wanted to buy was Ovaltines, but I never had enough money to buy Ovaltines. But I could buy these small packets of potato chips. And so I would buy them and then I would break them up into individual chips and sell them to kids for a couple of cents to make enough money to buy the Ovaltines that I wanted to buy. But the interesting thing about it is now, entrepreneurship is seen as, really important and a great skill to develop and a great skill to, really encourage, even in young people. When I was in grade 1, so this is going back a while, my parents were called into the principal's office being like, your kid can't try to run a business in the playground at lunchtime. That's not what we do at this school. That's not okay. You've got to make them stop. So quite the opposite of encouraging entrepreneurship. It was very much discouraged. But my family was never academic. I don't think anyone in my family, on my parents, my grandparents, aunties, uncles, I don't think a single person ever went to university. So not an academic sort of, experience to leverage off. But everyone was entrepreneurial. They're all migrants and they all kind of make their own jobs. And, it's, I guess, kudos to my dad, because instead of being like, oh, you got to follow the rules, do what your teachers say, he was like, don't listen to your school, you just keep going and, come up with your own ideas and go for it. So, that still gave me the courage to keep trying and experimenting different things really through primary school. And then, all the way through up until now, I've always been, generating ideas and coming up with new business plans. And that's what I absolutely am passionate about.
Excellent. So what were some of the other types of businesses that you thought about along that route? And again, I'm just curious as to how that developed you as an individual. And again, like you've started many companies now, and where do you think that came from? And, obviously you were motivated to get something. Was it just the desire to get to the end, the means by which you wanted to accomplish at the end of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, even in schooling, I would do things like washing cars and literally, carrying a bucket and carrying like cleaning products and going door to door and knocking on doors and, seeing if someone wanted to get their car washed. Again, it wasn't super successful in that now you talk about conversion rates and stuff like that, not obviously terminology that I would have been using, but, you spend a day and you're knocking on doors and you might wash 3 cars. But for me, that was like amazing money. But I think what's really important is you've got to build confidence. You've got to have communication skills in selling. I think that no matter what you do, having an ability to communicate effectively and sell is a critical skill. I think it should be taught in universities much more widely. And some people see it as kind of, oh, I'm not a salesperson, particularly in universities and academia. Academics like, oh, I'm not a salesperson, I'm a prestigious academic. It's like, really? Do you ever apply for grants? Like, you're selling yourself, you're selling your grant proposal. Like, you got to be convincing, you got to be persuasive, you've got to really articulate why your research project is better than the 100 other, applications that are targeting the same money. So even something like academia, which you would think is probably the opposite end of a, traditional sales rep on the road, those types of communication skills, understanding, someone's needs, is really, really important. And then, of course, the other side of it is just from an early age understanding budgeting. Like, you've got this concept already that, well, hang on, if I have to buy all of these products and I'm getting $15 for washing a car, again, that's kind of age going back. But it doesn't help if it costs you $20 and you're selling a product or a service for $15. So I think they're just very basic lessons that are really good for kids to learn. And I mean, I was just driving the other day at the end of the street here, and there were two young girls and, lemonade stand. It was just like so awesome. I didn't need a lemonade, but, stopped and bought a couple of lemonades and gave them a few dollars, because I just think encouraging that type of spirit is just, there's so many lessons in that you don't get in the classroom.
Yeah. Yeah. For some reason, it makes me think. I listened most recently to there's a podcast called Acquired that I think is fantastic, and they deep dive into companies, and they did Starbucks with Howard Schultz, and he talked about his experience. I can't remember exactly which company. It was one of the big, might have been HP or something like that. And he was a sales rep, and he went door to door, going into all the companies, and just rejection after rejection after rejection. And he didn't grow up with much. His parents didn't have a lot of means, so he was bootstrapping it like everybody else. But when it got to Starbucks and trying to get funding and trying to get investors, he was happy to go to 200 and get rejected to only get one person in, because he was used to it, right? And the lessons that he learned to that point of communicating and showing people how to solve problems is extremely important. So
yeah, I think, Ross, that's so critical, and Acquired is great. And I've listened to that podcast with Starbucks as well. And of course, we all know Starbucks, and it's a global brand that's recognized, but that lesson is everywhere. I was talking to someone just last week who's raising money for a life sciences company, and it's a lot of money that they're trying to raise. But he was saying to me similar numbers. They had about 120 VCs that were the right fit for their type of organization, of which only 10 companies even agreed to have a meeting. Something like, I can't remember, I think he said about 10, maybe 15 companies agreed to have a meeting. And out of that, only one was the right fit that actually wants to invest. So you've got to have a bit of a backbone and a bit of resilience. And if you're going to, fall in a heap crying if someone says, no, sorry, not interested, then, sales is certainly not for you. And honestly, running a business is not for you either. But if it's like determination, and I've got a vision and I believe in it and I don't care what anyone else says, then there's fantastic stories, whether it's Ray Kroc at McDonald's or whatever, that, the amount of years of grinding without getting results, but then finally something clicks. You've got to have a certain determination and belief in yourself, which kind of leads on to another separate topic. But I believe that confidence, self-esteem and confidence is probably the most important. If it's not, it's in the top few things, but self-confidence and resilience is more important than technical capabilities, because it just gives you that drive to keep going in the face of challenges, which are always going to come up, competition, funding issues, whatever it might be. You just got to have that core of confidence that, you will get there. But you were also sort of asking about then, how some of that experience, led into other businesses and ventures and stuff. So, I'm kind of like very passionate about education and the way we got into education. Obviously, that's the field that we're in. And I was very lucky. So I mentioned a bit earlier that no one in my family was a university kind of academic style person. It was all entrepreneurship and typically migrants that didn't have the language, didn't have the qualifications. So, if you can't get a job, you have to create a job. But I was very lucky in school. I was never interested in school, never really did homework, never read. Until I got into sort of later into high school. And it's, that stereotype of having an amazing teacher that believes in you. So I remember, very, very clearly and fondly Miss Brown at my school, who was my English teacher. And for whatever reason, just thought there was something maybe in me that could do better and more in education. And so from that, I actually started developing a real passion, a love of literature
Mm-hmm.
and started studying and started reading, and then went on to Monash University and was interested in literature. I did a degree with a major in literature. I also did a major in philosophy and an honours year in political science. And I did a bunch of things. And that was purely out of interest, but I also had enough kind of insight to know there's not a lot of literature jobs and there's not a lot of philosophy jobs, being advertised. So what are you going to really do? And that's where I did a law degree. So I thought, well, a law degree is pretty professional. Like, surely you can get, a career based on law, whether you practice law or not. So that was kind of the trajectory. And, you're talking about someone that's 18, 19, they don't know anything. Like, they might think they know everything. Like, I literally didn't know anything. But you're still doing a degree, on the assumption that, that's what people tell you to do.
Yeah.
And what I found, even though I studied pretty hard, it's a lot of work. You're cramming for exams, you're writing a lot of assignments. I graduated with honors. It's like fan-bloody-tastic. I'm like ready to start working and I'm going to kill it. Yeah. And then I did start working, only to realize I was completely useless. Not a bit useless, like totally useless. Did not know how to do a single thing in the workplace. And, that's kind of not really great for your confidence. And you feel like you're out of your depth and you don't know what you're doing. And are other people going to realize that you've got no clue? And are you going to keep your job? And, but then you speak to people inside, your own environment, but also friends and mates that are doing anything from marketing and IT, and everyone you speak to is like, yeah, university teaches you nothing. Everything you do in your lectures and reading textbooks doesn't prepare you at all for the workplace. It literally just gets you an interview so that you can get a job and then start learning on the job. And that's the model. And even universities recognize that. They've even got a term for it. It's called signaling. It's like, well, we don't really teach you things that are going to help you in your career, but it's kind of like a signal to the market that at least you've got the discipline and enough brain power to get through a degree, so then you can probably learn other more useful and relevant things. That is a terrible scenario for an organization, a university, whatever, that is charging on average $60,000 for an MBA. You're spending a lot of time and effort to get that MBA, only to then be told, well, you're not going to really get any use out of it, but it's just good to put on your CV. Yeah. It is good to put on your CV, by the way. In and of itself, a degree will, on average, get you a job. It'll get you a better level job, and it'll get you a better paying job. So just the statistics, if you look at Australian Bureau of Statistics, if you look at US Bureau of Labor, by having an advanced degree, you're going to earn more money and have a higher level job. So that's fine, but it's also a little bit shallow. Like, if you're going to do the degree, you might as well also get some value out of it, some practical skills that you can utilize, not just getting it for the piece of paper. So that was really the approach that I came from, the background of, yes, get a degree. We're all for getting a degree. But if you're going to get a degree, you should get a degree that's actually going to be more useful. And I can talk a little bit more about our journey and how we sort of developed that career-focused education. But what's interesting is that the pendulum has swung completely the other way. Now, you're talking about MBAs, you deal with universities and students studying a formal degree. A lot of the conversation now is moving towards skills-based education. Well, why do we even need a degree? For much less money, easier and quicker, you can just teach people through a boot camp, workshop, professional education, and you don't need a degree. There's a very, very big risk and problem with that thinking, and that is that anyone in education can have an intellectual debate about, well, what's the point of doing a 3-year bachelor degree when you can do a 6-month boot camp? What are the pros and cons? But the thing that we believe, or the position that we come from, is it actually doesn't matter what I think. It's irrelevant. What matters is how the industry reacts. How is the recruitment and hiring industry operating? And the truth is that the vast majority of jobs will require a degree just to apply. That's just to apply. You can't even get in the system with the majority of jobs, and certainly not higher level jobs without a degree. So that's where, this kind of conversation around, there's a lot of value for a degree on your resume to get a job, get higher income. Yeah, we agree. But it's also kind of useless, overly expensive, takes too long, sitting exams that you forget everything you crammed for 30 minutes after you walk out of the exam hall. So why bother with a degree? And the analogy that we use is, you could also talk about the health sector. I'm here in Los Angeles, so health is order of magnitude more problematic than it is in Australia. It works fairly well in Australia, and in the US, it's every level you can think of in health is problematic. Insurance, access to health services, the cost of health services, etc. But nobody would ever say, it would be irrational for anyone to say, well, the health system isn't working properly, so why don't we just get rid of hospitals and doctors? That's crazy. Obviously, the solution is to improve access and efficiency with doctors and hospitals. So that's our model and our thinking with universities. Because universities are generally too traditional, too academic, overly priced, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, let's just get rid of universities and degrees. Our view is, well, it's not that complicated. Why don't you then just make the degrees more relevant, more accessible, more affordable? So then you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting a practical education. You're also getting that recognized credential, and that's a win-win scenario for the students. So that's kind of just a little bit of background of how we were approaching what it is we're trying to design in higher education.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question around what, I guess we'll go to the point that I mentioned before we started recording. You have relationships with very world-leading businesses like Disney and Aston Martin and KPMG. And you obviously have that relationship with them, and they see value in what you're doing in this applied ability to bring real-world leaders in to teach people skills that they can take in and put straight into practice. What's that relationship like, and how do they perceive the value between what you're doing versus the traditional universities and institutions that are still doing it the same way that they've done in the past?
Yeah. So, it's not a surprise to anyone, some of the criticisms of universities not teaching career relevant skills, being too academic, out of touch. Universities' priorities are very, very different to graduate priorities. Universities talk about rankings, academic rankings, research, publications. That's really what drives the academic background of universities. That's their goal, their mission. They're academics, and they want to be seen as the best in academia and research and publishing. That is completely disconnected to the reason why a student is studying engineering at Sydney University. They're studying engineering. Just go ask them. I've said this to presidents and vice chancellors who are like, oh, we're, into broad learning and a broad-based education and research skills. And it's like, have you actually spoken to these students? Just walk on campus and grab an engineering student or grab an IT student and say, why are you here? And the answer is going to be, I'm here so I can get a job. It's as simple as that. So there is a fundamental disconnect between, what universities are there for and their own goals versus what their customers, students, are there for. And enterprises know that as well. So one of the things we were talking to Amazon recently, and Amazon's probably the largest employer training program that exists on the planet. Yeah. And their approach was really, really clever. And they talked about moving away from education as a benefit. So what that means, education as a benefit, is companies think, we should look after staff. We should care about our staff. We should give staff opportunities to get further education. So it's kind of like a HR goodwill, almost like offering other, whether it's mental health access, whether it's health insurance benefits, time off, whatever it may be. It's a benefit to the employee, a value add to the employee. And what the director of this education program at Amazon was saying is we really consciously moved away from education as a quote benefit to education as a strategy. How is training our staff going to solve and move our company forward with the vision that we have over the next 5 to 10 years? And so when we're talking to companies, we're saying, yes, do all of those things to be good to your staff. Give them opportunities, look after your staff, reward your staff by giving them access to quality education. Great. But, if you're Walmart, why are you funding a staff member to go to a local college down the road and do a medieval history class? It's a one-sided benefit. Isn't it better if you're going to fund education that they're doing a retail operations degree and solving actual challenges of Walmart? And that is, ironically, a benefit to the employee as well in multiple ways. Why is it a benefit to the employee? That the company gets value, not the employee, but why is it a benefit that the company gets value?
Yeah.
Firstly, it means the company is going to be more serious about embedding a support program for education. Because if the company doesn't see any value, it's kind of almost like, yeah, we do it, we're offering a bit of stuff, but we're not really behind it in a meaningful way, and we're not putting a lot of resources behind it. If you flip that and the company's like, no, we're getting serious ROI. Our staff are retained longer. They're better educated on things that we need. They're helping solve our corporate challenges. This is fantastic. It's like, we want to get as many people on this program as possible rather than like, yeah, it's kind of in the HR policy somewhere on the internet. If you look hard enough, you'll find it. That's very different to proactively promoting a program.
Yeah.
The second reason it's benefiting the employee is because they're solving important strategic projects of the company, and that's visible to the company. So almost half of our students talk about getting a promotion or a pay rise before they've even graduated, because they're not off, doing night school lectures and handing in a paper to a professor. They're solving throughout their entire degree strategic projects of their employer, and they have to present to their employer, hey, you wanted to know how AI could be used to create efficiency in this department. I've just been looking at our industry, looking at best practice for 3 months. Here's the recommendations of what our company can do. So this keeps happening with every project and every assignment. And then the manager's like, this is amazing. Like, how are you coming up with this stuff? And it's like, oh, it's part of my MBA that I'm doing. It's like, wow, that's amazing. And so obviously when a promotion, a leadership opportunity is coming up, the person who's been working actively on solving strategic challenges of the business is going to be best placed to get that promotion. So the kind of long answer, synthesizing that into one line, is it's got to be a win-win. It can't be a one-sided equation. If you're going to look at enterprise education, it's got to be something that genuinely helps the individuals, because otherwise they're not going to bother and they're not going to be motivated. It's got to be a real value to the employee. But the part that's been lacking historically is it's been a kind of goodwill gesture and not really a hard value to the employer. And if you can create that win-win, you just have a model where the biggest companies in the world, Qantas, Westpac Bank, PwC, LinkedIn, Pinterest, you name it, all these organizations, they want to be supporting their staff at the same time as really doing things that help achieve the vision of the company.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm going to go on a slight tangent here, just to how you've created your program. With having those conversations and being so integrated with some of these organizations, how has that helped you develop and improve the program, since you've started it?
Yeah, so it's a great question, because I think with anything that you're doing, you talked about Starbucks before, with anything you're doing, what is your core value, mission, purpose? And you've got to start there. And if that's not clear, then you're kind of floating around and bouncing into different tangents, and that's not necessarily a great outcome. For us, we're the opposite of a traditional university. We have no interest in pure research. We have no interest in academic journals where our staff are publishing articles. If they're doing that on their own, which a number of our academics do, good luck to them. But we don't really have any core structure in that space at all.
Yeah.
So our value and purpose is purely around career progression. That's it. And when you've got a focus on career progression, then everything about that changes from a traditional university. Our focus is in speaking to industry, understanding what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, what the needs are, what are the real skills. Because our measure of success is that our graduates are getting a pay rise or getting a promotion or shifting into a new role that is their kind of dream role, but not where they're at today. That's a measure of success. For a lot of educational institutions, their measure of success is very different. It's how many people did we graduate? How many students did we enroll? What is our average grade? Yes, we have grades because these are formal university degrees, but kind of who cares about the grade? The employers don't care about the grade. They're like, oh, did you get an 82? Did you get an 87 on your paper? No one cares. What they care about is, hey, we've got a culture challenge in our organization. We want more minorities into leadership positions. What are two tangible things that we can do over the next 3 to 5 years that are going to genuinely impact that strategy? And that's what is being presented. They don't care even if the student failed their assignment. I mean, obviously we want the students to pass, but the point is the score is not relevant to the employer. It's the outcome. And the career progression is really what's relevant to the employee. So that focus, that very, very sharp, clear focus with no other agenda. There's no agenda on, as I say, rankings, publishing, research. That drives a very, very focused curriculum development, support. Okay, we're assuming not that most of our students are on campus and full-time like traditional universities. We're working on the assumption that 100% of our students are full-time working professionals. They have families. So how are we designing education that works around that and fits into that real life scenario? How are we working with minorities? How are we working on improving gender equity? We do millions of dollars of scholarships in gender equality and women in leadership. So they're the sorts of things that are much more prevalent for us to think about, that are real world challenges that the companies are thinking of. So we're starting to talk the same language. And when we talk to L&D, HR and L&D, it's a really strong and positive conversation because L&D and HR are often looked upon in not the best commercial light. It's like, yeah, you're kind of running these programs and initiatives and you're doing it from a compliance HR perspective, but not a commercial perspective. Is this really helping the business? So, the stereotype of the C-suite not really taking HR very seriously, that HR really feels like it needs to be part of the core board and senior executive maybe has a different view. But we're coming from a position of working with HR and L&D to provide tangible ROI. So I mentioned, Ross, before that often an education institution is going to be talking about, well, how many people did we enroll and how many people graduated? We talk about financial ROI. We can go to a company and say, you invested X amount of money to put 20 managers through an MBA. We're going to show you the projects that they worked on, and this is the accumulated outcome financially of those projects that your managers said was the value. This is how much time we saved. This is how much increased margin we're going to make in this area. This is how much revenue growth we're going to make in a certain area. So, just off the top of my head using fake numbers, but the point is they might have invested $200,000 to put 20 people through a $10,000 MBA because we have super low cost MBAs available. 20 people to put through an MBA, $200,000. But we can show them they got $800,000 worth of value. That's an amazing ROI. That's where companies really get excited because HR can go back to their chief operations officer and CFO and say, look at the impact we're having on the business, not we're doing this because of compliance reasons or required education reasons, but because this is actually helping the business. And that's not the conversation that universities are having.
No, I can imagine. And we sort of mentioned earlier that one of the key differences with Ducere is the curriculum based around real world leaders, business people, these sort of ultra successful businessmen and women that can teach people very practical stuff. When you had the idea for Ducere and that concept of like, oh, let's build a curriculum around these people. One, you don't just, pick up the phone and call the former head of CIA or, next prime minister or something like that and say, hey, can you be a part of my business school? One, talk me through the idea that, how it germinated with you, and then when you realized that this could actually work and I can actually make this a reality.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the idea wasn't too hard to like articulate and for people to agree that that's a great idea. So conceptually, learning from the best people in the world makes sense. And actually, I was just talking about this recently about the Harvard business model, and people think Harvard's been around, for 400 years, since 1600s, which it has. And, it's always been this prestigious Harvard University. Well, that's not actually the case. It wasn't a known university and a prestigious university for centuries. It's when they developed through the Harvard Business School their case methodology, which is what really turned Harvard into Harvard and gave it that global notoriety. So that's not a new concept of learning from real world case examples. Don't learn theories in a textbook. Let's look at what Ford did. Let's look at what Tata Motors did. Let's look at what Qantas Airlines did. 15 years ago, here was the issue. Here's a scenario. What would you have done in this case? And that's great. And I've been lucky and privileged to have done programs at Harvard as well, and they're great. But the idea was to take it further, not to learn a case study about something that happened 10 years ago, but to work with current world leaders, teaching in the curriculum, and then solving current challenges within the business. So that's the case study, not a made-up case study or a historical case study, but a current case study. So the idea of learning from chairmen and founders and prime ministers and Nobel Prize winners in theory is like a no-brainer. It's like, yeah, of course. Why would you not want to do that? But then the challenge, which you already, mentioned quite correctly, is, well, how the hell do you get the head of the CIA or an Australian prime minister to join something that at the time is a completely new concept with no track record? So that was definitely a big risk and a big, concern. Are we going to actually be able to get the people to do this? Because when we talk about world leaders, we are talking about founder of USA Networks and the founder of Atari and a Canadian prime minister. People use leadership in a kind of loose term that, we've got this leadership and it's, someone who's running a couple of cafes, in Brisbane and they're a business leader. It's like, okay, yes, they're an entrepreneur, but they're not a world business leader. So how do you get these world business leaders? And it's a stepping stone approach. So the very first person, just lucky and had a connection to Alan Fels, if you remember Alan Fels, who worked very closely as an advisor to John Howard. And he was the first person that we were able to get on board as a global leader. And then it kind of built from there. And when he sort of really understood what we were doing, gave us a couple of contacts, then got Nobel Prize winner, and then started to get some other people. We did a lot of charity work in Africa. So I was able to get an African president and an African attorney general. And so we got this small group of world leaders. And then there's two things that really helped us propel to grow that much, much bigger. One is that we're a social enterprise and we fund philanthropic education across 27 countries in Africa. So it's really giving back. And we're not asking people to donate. You can imagine these people get probably an email or a call every day saying, hey, we've got this great cause, can you donate? We're not asking for any money. We're just asking for their brain power, for their experience and knowledge. And through that, we generate revenue that funds our registered philanthropic charity. So that's a novel idea. And they're like, wow, so we're actually supporting your charity by giving you time in your education. So that's one reason. And the second reason that once we got a few people, so, it's good in terms of the company you keep, once we got a few really great people, then when we spoke to other world leaders and said, you've obviously had a really successful career, surely no one has got to the level of being a billionaire or the global chairman of KPMG without any help along the way from anyone. So surely there's a couple of people that you could point to that were like, that mentor or that person, really changed the game for me and helped me get to where I am today. And so it's about giving back. It's giving that education and knowledge that's helping that next generation. Again, we're not asking them to get out their checkbook and give us $100,000 donation. We're just saying, we just want your knowledge and expertise. So it was a hard slog at first for sure, But then it just built up more and more momentum as we went, because at first it's like, we got this idea of getting a whole lot of global leaders, but we don't really have anyone. And you got to take a big, leap of faith to work with us. But once we had 30 world leaders, an African president, a Malaysian prime minister, an Australian prime minister, a Nobel Prize winner, and we said, look at these people who are involved. You should get involved too. It's like, oh, wow, that looks kind of pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But it's all based on, and I can say publicly that none of these world leaders are paid. We're not paying them like in the way Masterclass pays a very, very high amount of money, and it's a commercial transaction. Not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just that's a different model. We have a social enterprise model, and our world leaders are so amazing because they're not paid anything, and they are genuinely giving up their time because they believe in the vision and they want to help educate people.
Yeah, incredible. That's awesome. Is there anybody that, from the process of trying to get someone on board that was a memorable story, or that you learned something particularly important yourself that you were able to apply back into the business?
Every single person we've interviewed, for sure, and I've been lucky to interview a lot of people. And one of the big things for me, and I want to be careful what I say because these are all people in our global leaders faculty. But by and large, I would say 95% of people are humble, are giving, are charitable, are generously donating their time, and just kind of down to earth is maybe one terminology that would make sense. And then you have other people that are not necessarily wealthier or more experienced, but the ego, like it's just like you can smell it when you walk in the room. It's like it's everywhere. It's the way they react. It's the way they communicate, the way everything has to be set their way. And it's like, come on, I'm talking to like presidents and prime ministers and Nobel Prize winners every day. You're not the biggest thing in the world just because you've got some title. Like, we're all people. And, at the end of the day, just be a good, decent human and treat people with respect. And, you don't have to have this kind of, facade of being a big shot or whatever. And so that really resonated because I had that in a minimal way, that type of experience. It really emphasized most of the people who are so welcoming and encouraging and would sit around for like, an hour after an interview, like, oh my, I want to hear more and tell me about this. And how did you get into this, charitable work? And rather than, everything's got to be done their way. And so I think that's definitely something. But for me, I'm learning every day and working with these, world leaders, talking to like Kay Koplovitz, who was the founder of a $5 billion cable network company in the US, and talking about negotiation skills, learning about, how to support culture and minorities with the former chair of Qantas. It's just amazing. And that is what the students love and what they're learning. And you're learning from these real world people, and just getting back to the sort of academic side, how that's being applied is we have no exams. There are no exams in any of our degrees, not in our bachelor's and not in our master's. You're then applying these lessons from these real world leaders into practical current projects. And even on that, how many universities don't have exams? And probably count them on a hand. And the irony is universities are pretty good at research. So they research on their own industry. And there's been tons of research from Harvard and others about the efficacy of exams and how valuable, useful they are. And universities' research shows that exams are the single worst way to teach knowledge and retain information. But they still do it. So why do they do it? Well, there's two reasons. One is inertia, because, we've always done it this way, so we're going to keep doing it. It's like, well, the fact that you did something 100 years ago doesn't mean it's relevant to today. The world's pretty different today than it was 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. So inertia is a huge barrier that institutions find very, very hard to overcome. And the second is it's just a industrial factory methodology. So if you've got 1,000 students, it's easy to give them all a standardized paper at the same time with the same questions and just grade them. You're just turning over like a sausage factory. Is that the best learning? No, but it's really easy and efficient. So, learning from world leaders and then applying it to real challenges, customized and tailored into your career goals, that takes a lot more effort on our part, but you're delivering a more meaningful outcome to the student.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited, and I agree. It blows my mind again, I can only assume. I talked to Ben Reedy of MBA News recently, and he talks to a lot of MBA students and a lot of universities and these sorts of things. And I'm like, I can only put it into like the context of my brain of they're these Titanic ships, and they're sailing along, and it's so hard for them to turn the wheel and go in a slightly different direction because small changes in those things take a long time. But I get super excited about the idea when you think about that learning theory and, pushing somebody to the edge of discomfort of their learning capacity and, where that maximal learning is going to happen and where AI can take that. And, it can, hypothetically, work with somebody, understand exactly what their capabilities are at that point in time, then know, well, I need to put this material in front of them in order to get that right amount of stimulus, that right amount of discomfort without taking them too far to discourage them or without making it too easy that they don't learn anything. And not just applying that to, post-grad academics, but children, all the way from primary school. You can imagine the huge differences in learning curves that these children have, and yet they get stuck in a room and get the standardized test, and a few might be lucky enough if they're smart enough to go up a grade or whatever, but very much stymied by what's in front of them at that point in time rather than their capability.
Yeah, so that's such an interesting area, Ross. It's so much in that, and we could talk about this in a range of ways. But one aspect that's really interesting, I talked about confidence before and self-esteem and how important I think that is. So bringing that into this conversation, even with school kids, as you mentioned. So what's more important? Is it more important to memorize, maths formulas and get 90%, on a test? What's the most important thing? And the reason I say that is PISA international testing. So you've got all these countries that are given standardized math, science, English tests, and then they rank the countries. You can look them up every year. Yeah. And America often is the worst or close to the worst of industrial countries for standardized international school testing. That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
But then you look at the country, it's the wealthiest country in the world, and the entrepreneurship, Google, Apple, SpaceX, Tesla, Microsoft. So, well, hang on. Are these kids all stupid? Like, they're testing the worst, but then they're creating all of these billion-dollar companies in that country. What's going on there? And then something interesting happened with PISA testing more recently, where they started asking a couple of questions. They didn't just do the test. And they asked kids, well, how do you think you performed on the test? And what do you think the American kids said when they were asked, how well do you think you did?
They're the best.
They're the best. They were like, we aced it. We were awesome. We're fantastic. So there's this interesting thing where their test scores aren't really that great, but their confidence level and their belief in themselves is the highest. So is it better as a society to have a South Korean model, for example, where their test scores are really, really high, but not as entrepreneurial and innovative? There's some great entrepreneurial companies in Samsung, obviously, but very, very small in terms of real numbers, versus the US where their testing scores are really low, but every person, and their dog is like got this new idea and a, new startup that they want to get venture backing and launch, and it's going to be the next big thing. So that's a really important question. And so having challenge and stretching people, like a degree is not easy. We don't just give them away. Like no universities just hand them out like, just give us $5 and, you get a donut and a degree. Like it's not how it works. There's actually a lot of work in getting an MBA. But if you're going to do that work, at least make it valuable and useful, not just all this work just for the sake of getting a piece of paper, but the students are like discouraged all along the way because like, got to write this paper, rolling my eyes. I mean, I'm never going to use this stuff. but I have to spend my whole weekend doing this assignment. Whereas like we genuinely have students that say from the first few weeks of starting, this is great. Like I'm using this stuff in my business already, in my job already. And that's, so great that, that you can see the fruits of the efforts, that you're not doing it just as a means to an end.
Yeah. And I think moving forward, the world that we're creating with, the social media and this going to be this plethora of, AI generated content, both written, visual, and people needing to navigate that. There are certain skills, just critical thinking, problem solving skills that are going to separate the wheat from the chaff to a huge degree, because the people who have been taught those skills or have the opportunity to learn them through whatever experience that is formal or informal will no doubt rise above the people who don't, because it's going to be very treacherous waters going through and trying to figure that out if you don't have those skills.
Yes. And so AI is a really interesting topic, particularly in the context of education, for all sorts of reasons, the way curriculum is developed, the way students are, doing assessments, and whether they can use AI or can't use AI. But if you have a traditional education model with standard types of assessments which can use AI, or you're going to put people in an exam room and make them memorize stuff, what's the point? Like, honestly, what is the point of trying to get kids in 9th grade to memorize every capital city of every country in the world? Well, 50 years ago, you might have to go into a library, get an encyclopedia, pull it out, look up a country. Okay, so knowing that stuff would be actually helpful because you know it straight away. No one needs to know that now via memory because you just look up everything. So trying to outdo AI is not the solution. Being like, well, you're not allowed to use AI. You're going to have to manually do something that AI can probably do better and faster. There's really no value in that. You're hitting the nail on the head that what we need to move more towards is problem solving, creativity, taking initiative. They're the sorts of things that AI is not going to solve. And we inherently are lucky because, if you're a traditional university with a traditional assignment, like, give 3 reasons why, I don't know, World War II could have been avoided. So this is a sort of question that, comes up for decades, and you can put it into AI and you're going to get a response within 10 seconds. It's probably better than something I could research and write myself. But if your requirement is to do a tailored project within your company solving an actual challenge, AI can't do that. AI doesn't understand the intricacies of the business and that particular challenge you're trying to solve. So it really is about creative problem solving and not about you're going to have to memorize this chapter and then be able to regurgitate that chapter in an exam setting. It's just so useless. And you're taking up students' time and mental capacity for something that is really not adding value. So at the end of the day, for us, we think everyone should have access to world-class education. Everyone, you're in the MBA space. We do bachelors as well. But in the MBA space, every manager should be able to get a world-class MBA because they're going to learn a lot and it's going to help them in their career. But there's a lot of barriers. One barrier is the cost. One barrier is the time. And a big barrier is also the relevance. Do I really want to spend 1 or 2 years learning stuff that I know I'm not going to use just to get that piece of paper? So overcoming all of those challenges, having degrees from 10,000 Australian dollars, having finance options from Canadian government, UK government, fee help obviously in Australia, Sally Mae loans in the US. So overcoming that funding challenge is huge, making it affordable and accessible to everyone, but then making it relevant, fitting into your schedule, overcoming that time barrier. If you can do that so that the degrees are really meaningful and accessible to more people, that's great, because what we don't want is to perpetuate, a system of privilege. Oh, well, if you're really wealthy and you can afford $60,000, $70,000, $100,000 and you've got the luxury of time because you've got family support and other things, great. You can go and do an MBA at a lot of good schools. But what if you're a single parent and you're not earning, $200,000 a year? How are you going to get from a certain level to work your way up? You're kind of in a really tough position. And we want to really cater for the entire market. I mean, we deliver degrees in third world countries for like $3,000 that you can pay over time, years. So that's really the passion for us. That, of course, we're going to say this and you're going to think it's a sales pitch, but genuinely students saying to us, thank you so much. This has changed my life. I never thought I'd have an opportunity to get a degree. It was always my dream and I never thought it would be possible. This is going to impact on my whole family. That's amazing when you get that type of feedback from students, that you're helping them to achieve a dream and improve their family's position that they otherwise just didn't think was honestly accessible.
Yeah, that is fantastic. I love hearing those stories, and I know the MBA definitely had a big impact on my life, not just from a career perspective, but just the lessons you learn and applying that to personal circumstances. So, look, I think that's a really nice way to wrap that up on that bit of a sentiment. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with the audience before we wrap it up?
Only, Ross, that what you're doing is awesome. Love what you guys are doing in the MBA space. Part of the challenge is, people being informed, knowing what's out there, knowing the challenges and opportunities. So, it's a critical piece that you're playing. So, thanks for all the great work you're doing, whether it's podcasts, awards, etc. So I think that's really, really valuable because, that's just going to help more and more people get access to the right information and make informed choices and be able to access quality education. So, good on you and appreciate everything that you're doing too.
Yeah, cheers, Matt. Well, on that, the awards nominations are open right now for the MBA Oz Awards for 2024. That will be held in Sydney in October. So if you want to head to the MBA Oz website and look at the nomination details, if you know somebody that's doing some outstanding stuff in the MBA space or in their career with an MBA, forward that information through and let them know to apply or speak to the university. But thank you, Matt. It was a pleasure. I'll keep you around for a second after I hit the end of the record button. But it was a pleasure.
Excellent. Thanks, Ross. Pleasure on my end too.
Where's my button? I need to change the setup so I can see my screen a bit better.